Alright guys, welcome into the Game 2 review from the 2014 Treasure Valley Chess Championship held the week after the 2014 Millionaire Open. Like I said, the first couple of games were not too much to write home about, not too challenging for me. Just wanted to maintain the proper focus, have come into the game with the right intensity. Not lose my focus. Don't want to play down to the level of my competition. That's been something over the years I've been trying to fix in myself. So this opponent was actually lower rated than my first round opponent by a couple hundred points. I wouldn't know without going back and looking at the USCF information, but I would guess if I was getting paired with him in the second round, that probably means he pulled off an upset in the first round. And he beat somebody pretty good. So he played d4. And again, guys, I just want to keep my focus in this game. Something you can always challenge yourself, especially if you're the higher rated opponent or significantly higher rated opponent, is just focus on playing the best game you can possibly play. Remember, as much as it may not seem possible at times, there might be such a wide gap between you and your opponent. If your opponent is trying, I guarantee if your opponent is trying and you are giving maybe half your effort to the game, at some point it's going to come back to bite you. So against d4 in 2014, I was playing a lot of Dutch openings, so I played f5. Any of you guys who have seen a lot of my videos know that I play f4 with white. Essentially the same type of thing. We take control over this e4 square, and there's a lot of interesting possibilities here for white. Options of c4, knight f3 stuff, take control over this e5 square. Even like bishop f4 is an idea. e3, he could probably play g3 and bishop g2. Take control of this long diagonal. Anything essentially that fights for control over the center is probably a good idea in this position. But he opted for knight c3, which I understand the logic behind it. You're thinking of playing pawn to e4, and then on f takes e4, maybe you'll play knight e4. E4, fe4, knight e4 is a possibility, or e4, fe4, f3, offering a gambit to have both your knights out is a possibility. Knight c3 is just not a move I would probably play for white in this position, simply because I feel like it's more dynamic to have your pawns on c4 and d4, and then play knight c3. You just give yourself some more possibilities. So I played knight f6, taking more control over this e4 square, and my opponent played bishop f4. So both sides are just developing their pieces naturally. And here I decided to opt for something I would try to do with the white pieces, and if I had played f4 with white. So e6, my opponent plays knight f3. My opponent hasn't done anything specifically wrong to this point. He's bringing out his pieces. He is controlling the center of the board. And at this point, it's looking, to me at least, it's looking like it could be a fight for a little bit, and I played bishop b4. So right away, putting pressure here on this knight, and hinting that I might like to take on c3 and post up my knight on e4, where it has no pieces challenging it. Also talked a lot about pawn structures, double c pawns, isolated a pawns, and a lot of the success I've had as both white and black in forcing those kinds of structures, and my opponent not being able to come up with the proper ideas of how to handle those things. I feel like if you guys want to start picking up wins, especially those of you guys who might be below 1500, this is a good way to do it. Learn how to play against pawn weaknesses, potential pawn weaknesses. I guarantee that even if a structure shouldn't be the end of the world, like if your opponent has double c pawns and it shouldn't be the end of the world, it's going to make people uncomfortable. It's going to make people uncomfortable. A lot of times they're not going to be sure what to do. So my opponent played a3. He said, give me the bishop, to which I quickly said, thank you very much. I will take your knight. And this is what I'm talking about here. This structure on the queen side with the double c-pawns, the isolated a-pawn, this is not a losing position for white. I don't want you guys to think this is a losing structure for white and just be like, oh, well, now it's an easy win. It isn't. It isn't. I think it's just that people are not sure how to play with some of these pawn structures when they encounter them, and they can get in trouble really quickly. So what I like to do in this type of position is, now that we've weakened this potentially, play b6 and take control of the long diagonal. We're not moving too quickly. We're still going to develop our pieces. And on g3, we play bishop b7, bishop g2, and castle. And white castles. So here, other than these queenside pawns right now, I'd say both sides are doing pretty well. One thing to remember, if you are creating this specific structure for black, you've weakened white's queenside structure, or even say black has double c pawns and an isolated a pawn. Like if you had played f4, you can use the same idea with the white pieces. Remember that while you can take advantage, you can try to attack these weaknesses with pieces on the board. You could also just trade equal for equal. And a lot of these endgames should be winning for the side that's playing against the pawn weaknesses. If you can imagine right now, we trade off all the minor pieces, trade the rooks, trade the queens. This is a winning endgame for black already, because white is not going to be able to protect these queenside pawns in the long run. So it's never too early to keep that in mind. Never too early to keep that in mind. And here I opted to play d6. The idea is that I just don't want anything to land on the e5 square. I also want to play knights. I don't want to play necessarily knight c6. Knight c6 here. I guess we can play it here because we have enough coverage over d5. But it's more natural to put the knight on d7 and keep our bishop open on this long diagonal. So d6 makes sense. Keep your knight from getting in the way of the bishop. Play knight d7, queen e7, and then push e5. That's one of the ideas of this d6 move. Can I play knight d7? Can I play queen e7? And push e5. Gain some space in the center of the board. My opponent played c4. I played queen e7. Rook e1. This is a move that if my opponent could build it up enough, we might have to watch out for it. But he's not threatening it right away. Obviously, because we have bishop, pawn, and knight defending the square, and he only has a rook. So if he pushes, we're just going to say thank you very much for the pawn, and we're just going to take it. And I played knight e4. So useful to post this knight up on this active square e4. Eyeball some of these squares. Maybe some of these kingside squares are a possibility. And my opponent played d5. And this is a move that can definitely look very appealing for the person with the white pieces here. Because on one hand, you are completely cutting off this dark light square bishop on this long diagonal. But if we think about this logically, for a second, first of all, I'm going to go take the tempo in the center of the board. I'm going to hit this bishop. Bishop g5 is not a move. We just win a piece. So we throw bishop g5 out right away. Well, now he has to move his bishop. So bishop e3, bishop d2, or bishop c1. Obviously, bishop c1 is where he came from. So that's not ideal. Bishop d2 is just kind of claustrophobic. It's not really doing anything on d2, and it's getting in the way of the other pieces. But bishop e3 doesn't look like that great an option either. And white has to move the bishop. So he plays bishop e3, and at this point, black is advantage is growing as the moves go on. This is a very, very good position for black. And going back to what I said about this d pawn for white, it looks like a very strong move because it is blocking our bishop off. But if we think about this logically, this bishop can always come to a6 or c8, depending on what happens. a6, it's going to be putting pressure on this c pawn, which is very, very hard to defend. In c8, we might play f4, and then this bishop is just coming alive on this diagonal. If you notice, it's a little bit harder for white to develop his bishop. His bishop is also going to be blocked by this pawn. So bishop f1, the e pawn's in the way. So bishop f1 doesn't really make sense. And on bishop h3, that's not really threatening anything. But you can just play bishop c8. This bishop is nothing we have to worry about on h3. So at this point, black is doing very, very well. Very comfortable position. And it's not really clear what white's going to do here. So we bring out our last piece, knight d7. And now queen d3. My opponent is not sure what to do. And this is kind of where the position really starts to fall apart. Come into a6. Come into a6. Put some pressure on this c pawn. And tell white, you know, basically, you're gonna have to spend some time defending this pawn. Because if you move it, I take your queen. If you move your queen away, I'm just gonna take it, and then d5 becomes weak. And typically in a position like this, once one of these c pawns falls, usually the c4 pawn falls, another one will fall right after. It's like a dominoes effect. Once one falls, the whole thing's gonna fall over quickly. So my opponent plays knight d2. His idea is that he wants to challenge my strong knight on e4. But I have knight c5. Now, obviously, we are attacking the white queen. And that queen actually has no escape squares. All of these squares are covered, and he's blocked in by his pieces. So my opponent... Oops, that's not what was played. Sorry. That's not what happened, guys. My opponent takes on c5. So he frees up some squares for his queen. And then, as you can guess, we take with the knight and we hit his queen. And then on queen e3, I came up with a very, very, very strong idea here. Black is basically winning with proper play. Because of these pawns on the queen side. And my pieces are much more active. And I played f4 with tempo on this queen. If pawn takes, guys, don't take with the e pawn, because that's just going to hang your queen. And you're going to go from being in a completely winning position to being in a completely losing position. My opponent takes on f4. You take with the rook. And now the first thing to notice is our bishop on a6 is applying pressure on c4. So we have two attackers and he has one defender. And we have the open a file, f file for the other rook, where it can put pressure on this f2 pawn. And we can bring our queen into g5 or h4. H4, she's actually increasing that pressure on f2. And in comparison, white's pieces are... They're just not the same quality. They're not doing as much for white. This knight is pinned down to defending this pawn. This queen is kind of... I'm not really sure what this queen's doing. This bishop is on a blocked diagonal. And this rook came to e1, but I'm not really sure what he's doing on e1. Plus, this a8 rook's not doing anything. So, my opponent played queen h3, and I played the very natural move, rook a to f8. Now, I'm just threatening to crash through on f2. And my opponent has to do something about that threat. So, he plays rook f1. And now that I've forced his rook into an even less active position, now it's time to take some material. Bishop takes c4. Knight c4 and rook c4. So this is what I was talking about. Finally, I have won that weak c pawn. And now if you guys notice, now the c2 pawn is under fire. So we're up a pawn. And these pawns are looking, they're looking a little sus. And in comparison, white can't really create any threats against our pawns. You notice because I don't have any double pawns, isolated pawns, it's hard for white to create any threats. So he's down a pawn and he has to passively defend to not go down more material here. So rook c1. And here you can make a lot of different moves to win this game. It's really just a matter of preference. I opted to bring the rook back. So I'm trying to keep him pinned down to defending against f2. e3, he hits our rook. We just move it back, rook f5, f3, and now queen g5. Queen g5, we pin his bishop to his king, but we're also threatening queen e3 check, grabbing another pawn. So my opponent defends. And queen g6. Queen g6 with the idea that if he plays queen g3 or queen g4, I'm not going to play queen takes queen, even though that's completely winning as well. But I'm going to go rook g5. So that's what happened. Queen g4 and rook here. And now if his queen moves, he needs to defend this bishop. So queen h3. He's got to keep his queen and his king guarding this. Otherwise, this bishop's just going to fall with check. And that's going to be the game. But we grab c2, so now we're 2 pawns ahead. Our pieces are still much more active than our opponents. f4. Take. We're up 2 pawns, so we're happy to trade. That benefits us. Rook f5. He's attacking our queen. Queen c4. So we move our queen, but we're now attacking this f-pawn 3 times, just continuing to increase the pressure on our opponent. Queen e3, defending again. But I had 3 attackers and he only had 1 defender. You're not going to be able to defend that pawn in this position the number of times you need to, so we trade more. Now I'm 3 pawns ahead. I'm just saying, if you trade queens, I'm just going to cruise to a win here. He tries to keep the queens on the board, but I check. And I go knight d3. Knight d3 has this very nasty threat of, if he plays like, say, a4, knight f2, king g1, knight here, king h1. Oh, I thought I had a smothered mate, but I actually don't. This is winning, but there's no smothered mate. Interesting. Interesting. Okay, but knight d3, he played, I think he offered the queen exchange, that's right. And I just took, brought my knight back. About the only thing here that we're worried about as black, that we want to make sure we don't let happen, is the rook to come to the 7th and for him to start gobbling up our pawns. Bishop e4, and this is a big blunder, but he's already losing. I would like to go rook e8 right away, and then notice that this rook behind the bishop is undefended, but that would fall for bishop h7 check. And then on king h7, there's rook takes. And we're actually still doing fine here. I'm going to take on d5. And I would have 3 pawns and a knight for a rook. So we're not losing that, but we're not winning it either. So what you do first, before you pin that bishop to the rook, is you actually play g6. So that there's no bishop h7 check. h4, king g7, king h2, and then rook e8. Now there's no bishop h7 check, winning our rook. Also threatening knight d5, bishop d5, and then we take his rook. We take his rook on e3. So at this point he's already lost, but he played the move rook c3. He just let me have the bishop. Why did he do this, guys? I'm going to play knight h5. Knight h5 and knight f6. And even if his king can come over and defend this, then we're going to force trade everything off. And I'm going to have 3 extra pawns. And that's pretty easy. So he decided that he would let the bishop fall and try to take a couple pawns. But the rest is just simple technique. Get my rook behind my d-pawn, move my knight out of the way, and then start pushing. Rook d6, defend the b6 pawn. And now we bring the knight so that it can help support the push. My opponent offered to trade of pawns. I took it and pushed. h5 and d2, and my opponent resigned. Because on rook a1, there's rook d1, rook takes d1, and rook takes d1. And I'm just winning. Again, not super instructional if you are of a little bit higher level, but I was glad that I was able to take care of my first two opponents easy in this event right after the Millionaire Open. And was just focused moving forward. I know the next two games are going to be some pretty decent level opponents. So happy to walk away with the dub. Proud of my play. Accuracy in this game was 92. And you might say, well, yeah, you're playing a 1,000 rated player. But I think it is important to point out, guys, that sometimes when there's that big of a rating gap between you and somebody else, a lot of times you don't have to play with a super, super high accuracy. So it's actually very easy to be lazy and play a game that maybe you're still going to win pretty easily, but to just not try to play the best moves. But as somebody who's trying to get to a higher level, it is important to hold yourself to higher standards. Even when you're playing people you should beat easily. So hopefully you enjoyed that game. I'll be bringing you game 3 here in a little bit. Let me know if you liked what you saw in this game. Leave some comments here in the YouTube section. Subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff. And I'll bring you the last 2 games here in a little bit. Thanks for everything, guys.